Good morning, everybody. My name is Gloria. I'm from Nature Society Singapore, and I'm the Vice Chair of the Education Committee. Okay, so today we have with us Mr. Robert Stuebing and my co-host, Dr. Yong Ding Li. So essentially, just some house rules before we start. We mute yourself, please, and if you have questions, just feel free to type it in the chat box. And at the end of it, we'll have time for Q&A where Ding Li and I will read out the questions. Okay, so without further ado, I'll just hand the time over to Ding Li, who will take us through. Ding Li, over to
Thanks,
you.
thanks, Gloria. Yeah, and just to build on to what Gloria mentioned, if you have any questions during the presentation, you can plonk the question into the chat box. So we will come and revisit those questions
Yes.
when the Q&A begins. Yeah. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank all our friends here on this early morning call. I know it's a very tempting time to stay a bit longer in bed because it's raining in many parts of Southeast Asia, but we really appreciate you making your time to join us here with a very highly distinguished conservation biologist, Rob Stuebing. I think most of you here probably have read Rob's work at some point in your careers or through your own work in herpetology, zoology, and so on and so forth. So I probably won't go into the details because we could probably cover quite a bit on that. But Rob has worked a lot in Borneo. He's probably spent more time in Borneo than I've ever existed, and has a distinguished career, covering all parts of the island. I think Rob started some of his work in Borneo in Sabah, in Malaysia, many years ago, back in the 70s, and has gone on to work in Indonesian Borneo, in Sarawak, where he has lots of different engagement with government agencies, scientific research team. Rob is also very well known for his association with several museums in the United States of America, working on herpetology and amphibian and reptile taxonomy. So you might have, for those of you who are into herbs, you might have recalled that more than 20 years ago, this very important book was published. This book was something that I bought with my pocket money during my good days for more than $30, and has been my first ever field guide on frogs and reptiles in Southeast Asia. I still use it very much. So thanks, Rob, for giving us all these resources over the last 20, 30 years, and building up the what I call the herpetology cornerstones or foundations of Southeast Asia. I think I've probably said a lot at this stage, so I don't want to keep too much excitement there, and I'd like to now pass the floor to Rob to say a few more things about his work currently, and then we are ready to start the presentation anytime. Yep, over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Ding Li and Gloria. I really appreciate this opportunity and the support of the Nature Society and Ding Li's organization, BirdLife. I never expected to get this kind of opportunity, and would much prefer to be out in the forest somewhere, but the COVID has held me back a little bit. I first came out to Malaysia in '73 and worked some in the peninsula, and then went to Sabah, Sarawak, and finally into Kalimantan, and with a little time in Papua a few years ago. I'm a sort of dead keen on mainly crocodiles, snakes, and even frogs. But today, I really like to introduce this Mesangat area in East Kalimantan, which is an astonishing place. I hope that you'll agree with me by the time I'm finished. But meanwhile, I hope that this will interest you. And, at the end, if you have questions that you typed in, I'll try to answer them best I can. Shall we proceed, Ding Li?
Yes, Ding Li.
So Rob, I will turn on the share screen, and so when you need to move on to the next slide, just let me know. Yeah, so
I'll do that.
I'm going to click on the start presentation button right now.
All right. In East Kalimantan, which is one of the most forested areas that remains in the island, of course, Kalimantan being around 60 to 70% of Borneo, there is a place that is a wetland, and I was first attracted to it by this little chap that you see on the screen, which is a Tomistoma schlegelii, or the Sunda gharial. I've always been looking for crocodiles for many years, even when I first came to Malaysia, but this was my favorite. And so when I discovered, once I started working in the Mahakam Basin, that there was a site that had a lot of them, I had to go there. So let's get going with this, and maybe we can learn a bit more about this creature and some of the places that it occurs. Okay. Now the site that we're talking about is the eastern part of East Kalimantan. It has, it's part of a very large wetland that if you ever have a chance, try to look up some articles by Robert Hall, who's a geologist who's done a lot of tectonic articles on the tectonic movements of Southeast Asia. Borneo used to be just a small crescent of land. It was eroded down about 1 kilometer, and a lot of the sediments, of course, reached out towards the sea and left a basin in between, which is the Mahakam Lakes. Next. Okay. Now this is a quick vision of what the Sunda Shelf, where Borneo, Malaya, Sumatra, and so on were located, but still dry land. No South China Sea back then. It was a marshy, swampy area. It's very clear to me that it was perfect for the Tomistoma and the another crocodile species that we'll mention in a bit. And those crocodiles, now still common throughout Kalimantan, are sort of the relict or remnant areas of those big freshwater lakes that must have been much more abundant about 20,000 years ago. Next. Many of these wetlands are very old, but most of the ones we see now are probably maybe 20 or 30,000 years old. They are seasonal. When they are in the rainy season, they expand into these huge areas and then contract back during the dry season. But there's at least 500,000 hectares of wetlands in a belt that stretches from the upper part, northeastern part of East Kalimantan and down to the southwest. There's some articles there that you can look up to read about these places.
Rob, you are muted.
During the wet season, they can handle large transport boats. This boat, if you look carefully, is carrying 2 dump trucks as well as a car that you can't see. And these ply a route up from about Kota Bangun upriver to the place where I was working. And in the dry season, you can barely get a small boat through there. Next. The terrain now looks, okay. Now, Mesangat is also a lake, but it's broken up by a lot of islands of forests which still exist there. The sort of the sad part of the tale is that it was heavily logged starting in the 1970s up until perhaps 1990. That was followed by these El Nino or ENSO events, huge fires, particularly 82, 83, and then 97, 98. And of course, land clearing by people. leaving quite a degraded landscape, but not a lot of the original vegetation, at least no economic timber. The floods there are impressive, between 3 and 4 meters high. Now, if you look up at your ceiling, it's probably not even 4 meters. The soils had a thin layer of peat. They were known as karangas, which is an Iban word meaning where rice will not grow. And those soils are also underneath just white sand. All of the disturbance opened up a very large area to invasive species, both local and exotic, both flora and fauna. And at first appearance, you might think that the place is a really hopeless wasteland. There is still some subsistence use of local species by the people, but it's a very an area of intensely endemic poverty. There's no industry there, very difficult to farm. The good part is that it is a distinct biological community even now. And what I would like to discuss today is that there are stable populations of at least 5, probably more, endangered species that persist there. Next. Now, this is the landscape, and we'll talk about this part in a minute. But if you look, these are the red areas, are the company called PT Realkaltim Plantations, these areas. And I have worked for them as a conservation advisor for now, I guess, about 7 or 8 years. And this area is the place where Mesangat occurs. You see the dark green in the middle. I hope you can see it. And then outside of it is some areas that were initially tagged for oil palm. Next. You got it next, Dingley? Okay. Now, one aspect that has been very significant for Mesangat is the transmigration. Oh, sorry, missed that. Let's try that again. Here are some of the examples of this invasive flora, which covers almost the entire area. The history is that even during colonial times under the Dutch, Java was extremely crowded, the island of Java, where most of the political systems were present. And poverty alleviation was in the form of moving people throughout Indonesia, which is a huge country in terms of the area. And some of them were transmigrants to the Mesangat area, mostly landless peasant farmers from East Kalimantan. They stayed, in most cases, just for 10 or 20 years, maybe. Their farming methods, compared to the farming that they could do in Java, where the soils are very rich, turned out to be hopeless because of the poor soils in Mesangat, resulting in, again, a devastation of certain areas of the landscape that was not really their fault. But in the end, many migrated to the cities such as Samarinda and, Sangata. Next. Here we are. Now, if you go there, you'll find that there are places where the open water is not visible anymore because of this water cabbage. You may have seen it already in Singapore. I imagine it occurs. Or water hyacinth, both of these from South America, and some extremely hardy, pandans, giant pandans, and many grasses that are forming clumps that eventually will become islands, are very difficult to break apart. Next. One of the local invasives, I'm sure you've seen one, and maybe you've eaten one, is the northern or Asian snakehead. It wasn't present in Mesangat before. it found its way in about 10 or 20 years ago. It's turned out to be something that the fishermen like to catch because they can sell this, and they get to be, well, quite sizable. Next. It's a little slow to load, but here we are. Now you can see the size that they reach, and sometimes larger than that. Unfortunately, they have been eating up the local snakeheads, which are much smaller. There are two other species, but they end up as salt fish, ikan kering or ikan asin. And these, in certain times of the year, all of Desa Kelenjar Hulu is full of these drying bits of fish, which I'm told are very popular in Sulawesi, although the local people don't like it very much. Next. Okay. The most significant event over the past 15 years occurred in 2008 when an oil palm company, Cipta Dawia Mandiri or CDM, acquired a property which contained the Mesangat wetland and started operations to plant it. And as you can see, it wasn't ideal for planting oil palm. I think some of the estate planners or the estate planters, when they saw this green, bright green, they thought it was a padang. In fact, it is sedge, which will only grow in water. And so when they dug the drainage ditches, the idea was to drain the water out of the landscape into Lake Mesangat. And there were, go ahead, that's, yeah. And there were some unfortunate, yes, next, hiccups along the way. I think the notable aspect of this photo, which I've always liked, is that they were rescued by the conservation team. Because these excavators are a little expensive, I think within a very short time, the company was convinced that maybe this would be used in a better way, not really for oil palm. Next. However, and I hate to take credit for things, but I sort of have to take credit for this. When I saw the ditches, the drains being dug to drain the land into the Mesangat Lake, I told the planter that the estate manager, that this was a really bad idea. We didn't want anything flowing out of the estates into a conservation area. So they dutifully closed the drains. And within a short time, we had a report of a very large crocodile that had attacked a cow, one of the villagers' cows. And it was about a 3-meter tomistoma. And of course, I was shocked and saddened by this because my directive to try to preserve the habitat had resulted in this poor guy, or actually girl, being trapped in the area near the village. Eventually was caught. We tried to compensate the people and to allow us to release it, but they refused. Then the cow died, and it was not good for anyone. This local teacher was the only person that seemed to have a lot of sympathy for the animal, which unfortunately died soon after. Next. So we decided that we had to get moving, and we didn't. Yayasan Ulin is very small. We had only a few people in it, but fortunately we had the support of Reakal team, and as the conservation technical advisor, we could use the access the staff and the equipment of the conservation department, which you sort of see behind the graphic there. The conservation department is embedded in the company. It has 3 basic This is whole talk in itself, but units, one that looks after the ecological services and the quality of the soils in the plantation. Another one, the species that managed to survive in this altered landscape, and local communities trying to get them on board to conserving the forests that are left and to work with them to do that. Next. Rare conservation, I think, is exemplary in a few ways. In one of them is it has its own field station for scientific research. We cited it because it had a natural forest on one side, a wetland on another side, and of course surrounded by oil palm. So we could have a look at the relationship between these natural habitats and the oil palm, which was of course not always a happy one, but we found that we had orangutans living in the forest that are there to this day. We have a laboratory, we have some hostel accommodations, and if you would like to go there, it can always be arranged if you're interested. Next. Now, the Yayasan Ulin, or the Ironwood Foundation, acquired a palatial office, as you can see, in Desa Kalinjahulu, which is the closest village to the Mesangat Wetland. And this has a accommodation for about 12 or 15 people, has cooking facilities, and also our gear, our equipment, and some boats that we either hire or we have built for the occasion. It does flood, and in the wet season, you can actually wade into the office if that's the thing you like to do. But the office has been there, the mess, since 2011, and we are still holding on to it. We hope eventually we can buy it, but until now we rent it. Next. But if you're really dedicated and you really like crocodiles and you like a lot of running water, this is our research raft station at a 1/2 star rating that accommodates about 4 persons. We had several researchers there over a period of months, and they collected a lot of data. It has a lot to eat if you like eating the same kind of fish every day, but you know, you can get used to it. But it is remarkable because from this site you can go into many parts of the wetland and see a lot of crocodiles, and as we can see, many birds. Next. And there is the location of that raft. There's a tiny village of floating houses of the fishermen there. You can see the path that they use through the exotic weeds to get to the wetland. And from there you can, you don't see it too well here, but the river, the Mesangat River, goes through the forest. Now, in the forested areas, you don't see these invasive vegetation growing because there's no sun. So if you like to go a little more easily through the wetland, you can stick to the forest because it's permanently flooded, as you can see. Next. And the Yayasan Ulin, we currently have 3 permanent staff, and we hire the villagers, rent their boats, and invite them for little get-togethers at the office. The head of Yayasan Ulin is Ibu Suima, who is a graduate of Universitas Mula Warman in Samarinda, has been with the foundation since the beginning. A newer person is Brian, who is the one who does all the surveys now of the crocodiles and various other things in the wetlands, spends a lot of time setting cameras too. And then he is accompanied usually by Pa Iwan, who is from Desa Kalinjahulu. He's from the ethnically Kutai, a very old ethnic group in East Kalimantan, and they shoulder the burdens of keeping the place going and making sure we keep track of the crocodiles and their nests. Next. The floods that I mentioned, if you look carefully over at the left side, there is a water level indicator. And on that day, it was around 3.8 meters above the normal stage. And this flows everywhere. It also has eliminated quite a few buildings in Desa Kelinjahulu over the years. From the graphic, there it is, nearly 4 meters on a day in April, and then it has exceeded 3 meters or 2 meters on numerous occasions. Next. Now, I am not a botanist. You probably could tell that right away, but we have been fortunate that we've had help from LIPI, the Indonesian Institute of Sciences. We have had assistance from Bali Tech, which is the research arm of the Natural Resource Conservation Agency in East Kalimantan. And these were, oh, we got a little feedback there. These are plants identified by the Singapore Herbarium. Seems to be a little bit of background noise there. All right, next. Now, one of the things that was adopted straight from the Raya Kaltim Conservation Department was a data recording and management database, in which for each species, but particularly the endangered ones, we record the Latin name, the local name, whether it's endemic, what its status is according to the law in Indonesia, protected or not, its red list status with IUCN, CITES status as far as trade, its local status, which may be different from those mentioned just now. It could be sometimes more common where we are than in other parts of Indonesia, and where the habitat type that it was found in, and of course, most important, a GPS point and a date, so that we know where and when it was seen or recorded. The reason to do that is to be able to see a time sequence, what has happened to species, they moved around, if they've disappeared, or more have become available or more common. And then we can prioritize the money spent, the manpower used, so that we pay attention to the most important things. This is Homolopsis buccata, is a homolopsid snake, and it is common. It is also in the skin trade, but so far not showing any declines in Mesangat. Next. Now I'm going to take you a tour of the endangered species that Mesangat has. We have a couple of troops of the Proboscis monkey. This is a handsome male, and I guess in his underwear because it's white there. Endangered, but still quite easily seen. The unusual thing about these in Mesangat is that they forage on the ground sometimes, and I think Brian has taken some photographs of that. Next. Another quite striking mammal is this little cat, the flat-headed cat, which is not usually easily seen, but it appears to really love wetlands. And these are recent photographs, and if you look at the bottom two, there are actually two cats. Could be a male and a female, we don't know, but are relatively recently photographed with a camera trap. Not much is known about this. It has attracted a lot of attention, but because it's so hard to see, we still don't know much about it. Next. Okay, something that is more easily seen is the smooth-coated otter. There are a number of groups around there, and you probably would see them. It is not endangered, but it's just something that we have seen a fair number of times. Next. And of course, something that is used to be and probably still relatively common, the bearded pig in Kalimantan and Borneo. The reason that I put it in is because we have something called the African swine fever that has decimated domestic pigs. And we don't know whether it's arrived in Borneo, but if it does, this animal is endangered. I didn't include a sun bear, but sun bears are also routinely seen around the drier areas of the Mesangat. Next. Now, for those bird lovers, the most beautiful ugly bird that I know, which is the lesser adjutant stork, before in earlier years considered not endangered, but I'm told, at least in places in Malaysia, that it is viewed as endangered. They are somewhat seasonal, but when they're around, they are fairly easy to see because the burnt tree remains of the burnt trees from 1997-98 are favorite perching places for this bird, and you can see them and photograph them quite easily. Next. And this one's for Dr. Yong Ding Li, the next slide. I think he will like it. And if you don't know what this is, you should be ashamed of yourself. It's the storm stork. This flying, and full disclosure, this one was taken in the Rhea estates where we have set aside a wetland, and it walked into a camera trap. Brian just told me a day or two ago that there are at least 4 locations this has been seen over the past year in Mesangat, and that we have also seen this routinely over the years during the dry spells above the Mesangat River. It's quite a beautiful bird. I guess you would agree. Next. Now we get into more familiar territory for me, the Tomistoma, Gharial, or locally called Limbawan. And it's had an interesting history because in 2002, at a meeting of the crocodile specialist group, we were told we had to form a task force because there was nothing known about this species and that it may be critically endangered. Well, when I arrived in East Kalimantan and started looking for it, I discovered that if you lived in a certain area that was not urban, that was like Mesangat, you would see them fairly often. And so it went in a relatively short period of time from critically endangered to endangered. And when we published the IUCN Red List status about now 7 or 8 years ago, it was upgraded to vulnerable, meaning that it is more common than everyone believes because it's very shy. Next. Certain times of the year, you're almost guaranteed of seeing at least one of these. It appears to be abundant throughout the wetlands, although adults particularly tend to rest on the bottom of rivers or pools. And so you would never know they are there. Of course, they're brown, just like the substrate. Its diet, insects, crustacean, and as it gets larger, fish. And probably the nicest thing. It appears to be completely non-aggressive. They will bite you if you handle them because they don't like to be handled, and none of us do. But I've always wondered about reports of this attacking people, because the fishermen in Mesangat who lived there for decades have no fear of it whatsoever. Next. And it is a mound nester. You can see the nest here, usually within about maybe 3-4 meters of the river or a water source. And unlike the estuarine crocodile, which makes a nest of green, damp vegetation in swampy areas, these are dry. And they're almost always at the base of a tree. This one, the tree is very small, but the nests are fairly easy to see if you can get through the swamp. The main problem is usually the passage is very difficult. But it's interesting that they also lay the largest egg of any crocodilian. And somehow there's enough heat in there without being exposed to the sun for those eggs to hatch. Next. They are beautiful. There's no question about it. And my old friend, and now who has left us since, Ralph Summerland, always suspected that the ones in the Mahakam Basin are actually a different species from the ones that have been found in Sumatra and Peninsular Malaysia. The DNA has not been done. So all you enthusiastic crocodile DNA chasers can think about that. Just make sure you have all the permits. But the river drainages are separate. They don't overlap at all. Next. Now, here is actually the one that's become the star of the show. It is the Siamese crocodile. Now, they appear to had not realized that they're not in Siam and that they're very far from Thailand, but this is indeed the same species, and it was considered to be critically endangered. I guess still is in mainland Southeast Asia, but there is a thriving population in Mesangat. And these are also easy to see at night. They are also not aggressive, although they have a slightly more sensitive temper, shall we say, because if you try to handle one, it always will try to bite you. And I have direct experience with that, but I still have all my fingers, so we're fine. But this is critically endangered. It's the difference between the estuarine crocodile and this one, if you have any trouble identifying, are these scales in large scales just behind the platform. Estuarine crocodile, it's all small scales like that. These don't exist. Next. This may be the only photograph ever taken of that species on a nest. This is an old nest. Apparently it was no longer had any eggs in it, but the animal would come and sun itself on it in one of the parts of the Mesangat place. This is a different kind of situation. The nests are built on platforms of floating vegetation that are usually connected in some way to the bottom, so the nest doesn't flow away with the current. And they are somehow stay dry enough for the young to hatch and leave. But it will breed usually at the end of the wet season. And it has a more, well, shall we say, varied diet, apart from the insects when it's small, and crustaceans such as crabs or prawns. It eats water snakes, and it also, we know, eats birds and mammals. These are all part of the research that was done about 10 years ago. Next. So here in a nutshell is what was found by Natasha and Agatha, the two researchers, who, along with Ingan and some of the RIA Conservation Department staff. You can see that they're not that rare, and the estimated population first time around for the Siamese crocodile within a few square kilometers was 130. That did not include the greater wetland. The Tomistoma, because it was very easily found, no density has been calculated yet, but it is much more common. And it tends to favor the forested areas where the Siamensis likes the open water. Yeah, next. We have good cooperation, and we work well with the local research arm of the Natural Resource Conservation Agency located in Samarinda. And Pat goes there from time to time just to check out particularly the Siamese crocs. And he's obviously here found a baby, and they tend to be pretty good at breeding around the lake. Next. Now, one positive note, which is not regarded positively by everyone, but this is Brian looking at a Siamese croc that had sneaked into a local fish pond of one of the villagers, who then complained. And actually, this is happening more and more. This is a subadult, and subadults tend to wander a bit more than the bigger adults. But this, they have to be caught and translocated. And if I know crocodiles, often they'll find their way back for a free lunch or so. But it's nice to know that there are enough of them, they appear like this and are not truly rare as we would sometimes think. Next. Another endangered reptile, and one that is not well known except by the fishermen, is Orlitia borneensis, which is a giant terrapin or turtle that we sort of keep track of by when it bites on the baits and gets stuck on the hooks of the fishermen. We pay a small amount for them to give it to us. We remove the hook, weigh, measure, and then release them back. It's sort of a compensation and release program. But this is endangered, and it was traded. Next. In previous years, and you can see that they get to be good size. I have been giving conflicting stories about it. This is my old friend Ralph Summerland, who's no longer with us. This is Dr. Helen Kurniati of the Indonesian Institute of Sciences. This was a time in 2009, we found a group of them in sacks to be traded, be taken down, I guess, to the city and possibly exported. But after that, when I discussed with a few people, I was told by the locals that this doesn't happen anymore, that the buyers have disappeared. If that's from law enforcement, that's a very good news. I was told by also another person who had been known to eat almost anything that the flesh smells bad and he doesn't want to eat it. So both those things are very good for the species, although we have not seen any this large for a long time. At least we have seen continuous recruitment from the smaller aged and the younger animals. Next. A turtle that still is collected and consumed locally is the Amida, the soft-shelled turtle. And these can be extremely abundant. And it is, if I'm not mistaken, it is not protected in Indonesia, but it is also remains quite abundant. They also get very large, about 50 centimeters shell, or size that they, can be sold by the fishermen. But this is another case in which, because of the foundation there, they don't sell it when we are any place near us. Next. Now, I couldn't get through this without showing you a snake. And this was photographed a few years ago. The Goniosoma, beautiful snake, very good tempered, makes a nice pet if that's your thing. But please don't eat it. And it's common around Mesangat. And I have to, of course, next show at least a frog. And this is a Crocodile appendiculatus, which is often in rattan areas and swampy areas. And it's possible that this, in fact, is not that species. There is a possibility that it's actually different. That's been happening a lot lately, changes in nomenclature and the identity of species. Next. So we come down to this. My opinion is that Mesangat really does need conservation management. It needs protection, but we run into some difficulties, because if you approach funding agencies for conservation, they are mostly interested in pristine areas. If you show them a really degraded habitat that looks terrible, even when you say that there are a lot of endangered species, they are not terribly interested. But this lies outside of a legally protected area. It is a private area owned by a plantation company under the plantation ministry. So strictly speaking, it doesn't warrant conservation, but of course we can see that it really does. We would like to start up, we have been working on community-based management and also poverty alleviation, so that Glendale Hulu and other villages can actually benefit from the conservation of this site. What we have started this year, we haven't done much more than to gather some of the original vegetation and to rear it up for planting. But we would like to do rewilding. It is just nice for that. And we also have found that one orangutan appeared last year, and they could live there, and it could be a possible site for relocating some of the ones held in the orangutan conservation areas, where they won't mix with the wild ones, they won't convey any diseases, but they also could find a natural habitat for themselves. Next. One of the best things that happened is, over many years, Buswima and Monica Kuznetti, Kiki, worked on setting up a system with the provincial government under the governor's office called and to get status for an ecosystem, essential ecosystem classification. Now, the downside of that is that there's no money for this except for meetings, and there's really not much management, and there's no legal status. This is just a sort of a administrative status. It provides a way forward for Mesangat, but there's a lot of work to do. Next. So if you think you would like to support conservation in Mesangat, we're always there. We would welcome you to come and see. It's really a remarkable place. Thank you. We have two more slides here. First one is a gratitude for all the people that have helped us. And one more slide. We received a lot of assistance in the early days from zoos. And here are the true characters of this conservation effort, the ones that really count. Thank you very much. That's it.
Thanks, Rob, for that very, very, very insightful presentation. I think most of us here, in fact, all of us here would have learned a lot from your presentation and understand a little bit more about how conservation happens in this part of Indonesia that is not particularly well known. I think there were two lessons that I thought would be pretty important for those of us who work in conservation in Southeast Asia that came very strongly through your presentation. I mean, even though the highlights were the crocodiles and some of these really rare water birds that you have got there in Mesangat, I think the two key messages that I could take at least, and I am sure Gloria would probably agree with me, is that Mesangat is really one fantastic example of an example that a degraded ecosystem where there is immense biodiversity and provides at the same time that opportunity for ecological restoration to take place. I think there's a growing movement in ecological restoration in the global conservation community, and I hope at some point more efforts, more resources stream into Mesangat to make that happen at a larger scale. The other point that I wanted to raise was that Mesangat presents an example of conservation which is very representative of what we have in Southeast Asia, that we need to have the involvement of local communities to ensure that these things can be sustainable and effective. I wanted to, well, for many of our friends in Singapore, maybe they are not looking at examples such as this, but I find that a lot of conservation initiatives in the region has a dimension of poverty alleviation. So the question then is, how can we create jobs or create livelihoods for local people to provide that incentive for them to want to work with us conservationists? So I think these two themes came very clearly through. And I want to once again thank you for your fantastic presentation, for making time. I know it's pretty late in the United States right now, and yet you're staying up here telling us about these wonderful biodiversity. So huge thanks for that. I learned a lot, and I'm sure Gloria did as well.
Yes.
Gloria, would you like to say a few words as well before we proceed to the Q&A? I noticed that the chat box for questions have got quite a few comments in there, but yeah, over to you, Gloria.
Okay. Thanks, Rob and Ding Li. Thanks, Rob, for your presentation. It was really interesting. I was not very familiar with both crocodilian species, and it's been interesting to hear that they actually occupy different niches within Mesangat.
Yeah, and the storm stock as well, don't forget that.
Of course. Yeah, that's the starbird for a lot of people. Yeah. Okay, should we begin the Q&A, Ding Li?
Sure, but before we go to the Q&A, I just want to say a word about the storm stock because it's a species that is so poorly known in Sundaland. Storm stock is well, I'm not sure how many bird lovers are there in the audience, but I can spot at least one name, who is a Malaysian ornithologist, Wilbur from Peninsular Malaysia. Anyway, storm stock is one of those species that we don't really know about. It's currently given the IUCN rating of globally endangered. And currently what we know about the conservation status of this species and where the populations are concentrated are mostly in Sabah, in the Kinabatangan Basin, and bits and pieces in Sumatra and South Kalimantan. I think there are many records from Tanjung Puting and Sabangau and all that. So the fact that, Rob has shared with us the occurrence of this species means that this landscape also warrants, more studies of the storm stock on top of the ongoing work on crocodiles to see whether if this population in Mesangat is, how does it fit in with the bigger picture. Maybe we might find that storm stocks, like what you have found for Tomistoma, is could be commoner than what we currently know. Yeah. So back to you, Gloria, on Q&A. Yeah.
Okay. Let me read out the first question from Nick Baker. So he's asking that are the non-native toman, the snakehead, preyed upon by the two crocodilians and thus support the continued existence of these crocodiles?
I have to refer to the articles published by Agatha Staniewicz and Natasha Baylor. I can send those through as later on through an email. We know that they fish, but once the fish is in the tummy of the crocodiles, it's kind of hard to tell the species, unless I guess we do DNA. My impression is that the crocs, particularly the siamensis, but also the tomistoma, will eat any fish. So possibly when the toman, when the big chana becomes the size that we saw, might be more difficult, and the fact that there are so many big ones means that the crocodiles are not eating enough of them.
Okay. Ding Li, I'll take the next question.
Okay, let's see. There's a question here from Anthony Shadbolt. So his question is about the terrapins. I think the terrapins that you've shared just now. I mean, these are highly endangered chelonians. So the question is, how is the compensation? How is the compensation for the giant wetland terrapins funded in the ongoing conservation work?
Well, thank you, Tony. Was funded by the bank account of the Yayasan Ulin. We used money that we got from small donations from the zoos and so on, and I think we were for providing us with the turtles that they had caught. We compensated at that time at about $1 to $1.50 US per turtle, and that was enough to make them want to surrender the turtle to us and allow us to remove the hooks and take them somewhere to release them back. We were marking them for a while, but I left to work in Papua for 5 years, and that program was discontinued, and we started it up again. I think Brian can tell you more about that.
Okay.
I think Brian is on the floor, right? Brian, would you like to add a couple of comments to this as well?
Yeah, Brian, you can unmute yourself.
Yeah.
Hey, Brian. Yep.
Hi. So for the trapping, to compensate trappings, right?
Yeah.
Orlitia.
It's we got funding from, like Rob said, we got funding from Zeni, small fundings, and we got some, maybe there's some locals that have like conservation knowledge a little bit, some like cultural conservation knowledge, so they sometimes surrender it by itself, or if they need money, they just talk to us that, yeah, sometimes it's not about turtles, but sometimes they get crocodiles also. They get trapped into they call it bubu or something, or nets, fish nets, or fishing nets. Yeah.
Thanks for tackling that question. Yeah, and do this happen very frequently? What's the frequency of the Orlitia getting caught in the fish traps and nets?
It's quite rare though, because it maybe years like 2 or 3 times in a year, but tomistoma and Siamese is like a week. We can, if I there, it's like 4 to 5 individuals. Yeah, juvenile to hatchlings.
Juvenile to hatchlings, I see.
Yeah.
Thanks. I actually have a question for Rob myself. So, Gloria, could I ask a question first, and
Yeah,
I'll pass it back to you?
go ahead, please.
Yeah. So my question is a broader question. Yeah, because I think a lot of us would know that Indonesia plans to move its capital city to East Kalimantan province. I just wanted to see and hear Rob's view on what you foresee would happen when that moving process is completed. Do you think that there will be more threats and therefore more work that needs to be done, to alleviate these threats?
Well, you do know that I have to go back there to work, so I have to, be, yeah. I to tell you the truth, of course, any urbanization that spreads will be bad news for a lot of the the indigenous or the endemic species or the endangered ones. I may have a offbeat view on Jakarta moving to Balikpapan because I think the investment, despite Jakarta supposedly sinking, the investment in the city is so great that moving it will be sort of an overwhelming kind of thing that is likely to be postponed for many years. I'd be surprised if it happens in my lifetime, which of course is not that long, but I do think that in theory, a city of that size coming to East Kalimantan would be very bad news for areas that were not yet officially protected. Maybe some that already are.
That's a good point. Yeah, I mean, there's so much fantastic wetland, lowland forests, and limestone ecosystems in East Kalimantan.
Yep.
I just wonder how these would be impacted, in the coming years. Yeah, and
Well, we need limestone for making cement, so
yeah,
maybe
that's
what we.
absolutely, yeah, that's another concerning thing for these fairly unexplored limestone ecosystems. Yeah. So anyway, I'll pass it back to Gloria to tackle the.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
Gloria has a question on smooth otters. I think some of our friends who are into otters may want to know
Yeah,
more.
it's okay. I'll just ask touristy questions because
No
someone
worries,
is
yeah.
asking, is it
Sounds good.
possible for members of the public to go and visit and take part in some of the conservation activities? And if so, who should they contact?
All right, that's a question that we have had people come and visit as sort of ecotourists, people that we know, because we were at that time just setting up the foundation. The answer is a qualified yes, but is in many rural areas in Indonesia and Kalimantan, there is a process where when visitors come, we frequently must take them to the police to meet them and to get permission for them to stay there. And this may seem like a sort of a difficult thing for many people, and particularly people like Americans who don't want to be told to do anything. But this police, we are on very good terms with them, and Bu Suima is extremely well versed in all the procedures. So if you're willing to put up with some paperwork and you don't say that you're coming to work, that you're just coming to volunteer, we'd be glad to see you. We might need a little bit of a donation for food and for the boat transport. I mean, that's inevitable, but the answer is a qualified yes.
Okay, that's good.
Oh, and the person to contact, you can contact me, you can contact Ibu Suima, who is even a better contact than I am. And I can give you the email addresses. You may have them already, so that you can provide them for people who are interested.
Okay, will do. Okay, now I think Ding Li is doing something. I will just ask the next question. So as these wetlands remain under the plantation company, what is the long-term commitment of the company to the wetlands in terms of the conservation of it?
Well, Renown is a British-owned company listed on the London Stock Exchange, and remarkably, it has, for oil palm companies, has decided that this is really good for it to be involved in conservation, and we have very good communication with all levels of the company, and so they have been supporting this area with paying the taxes and looking after it for years now without actually achieving a serious benefit. So the answer would be it would be great if someone could help them out. Excuse me. Most companies don't like to have cost centers. I think Reakal team is unusual in the sense that it really is interested in conservation and has been delighted to see the work that is carried out, you know, in contrast to what it does for a living.
Okay, that's very good to hear. Ding Li, you want to ask next question?
I think maybe we can probably take one or two more questions. I think one of our colleagues here has asked about smooth otters. I think smooth otters is a particularly eye-catchy topic for many people in Southeast Asia because they've got quite a bit of media attention recently. So the question from Nien Zor Ko about smooth otters. How many smooth otters are there in Mesangat, and what is being done to study or conserve them? Any efforts on the smooth otters?
I think that, yeah, Brian would know better, and probably they could be contacted via email on that. There are several groups of them. We have seen them regularly since 2009, which is quite a long time ago, so that they appear to be not under threat. I mean, no one will eat them, and there's plenty for them to eat in Mesangat, and a lot of habitat for them to enjoy. And of course, access into the places that they go is limited, not to them, but for people who might be interested to chase them. There's no evidence that they are in any danger of disappearing. They seem to be quite, you know, as I say, there are several groups, and the groups are usually quite large.
Yeah, and still on the theme of mammals, I think there's one more question on mammals. I know we tend to talk more about the crocodilians in the landscape, but a few mammal questions coming through. One on small mammals. Anybody from Tony, I think, anybody working on small mammals yet in this landscape?
We have wanted to do that. We have a we have a memorandum of understanding with the Universitas Mula Warman in Samarinda, and we've had a number of students do their honors year and some master's degrees, but nobody on small mammals yet, although we have made lists of the ones that occur. There are a lot of rats that I would like to know what they are, because rats tend to look alike until you examine them very closely. But the answer to the question is we have not had any formal surveys of that, and it would be a good idea. We would actually do lots of things if we had lots of money, but and for people who would say that, well, the oil palm company has lots of money. Well, if they're paying huge amounts of money for the taxes for this site and not developing it, we'll give them a pass on that. You know, it'd be up to us to raise the money to do those things.
Yeah, for one, I'm offering my time to do a bird survey. Anytime you want me to be there in Kalimantan.
Can you come tomorrow?
We'll see how. Yeah, but yeah, I think the landscapes look really interesting. I mean, the forests from the aerial photograph that you shared, there's still quite a bit of good quality swampy forest, and it will be really interesting to see what's in there. Yeah.
Well, I can send you a folder of that. Is just a small portion of that wetland. The photograph I showed.
Cool. Yeah. So yeah, we'll try to explore ways of getting over to East Kalimantan as soon as the pandemic fades away.
Yes,
one question. There's one question from our colleague Shen. Shen is a paleontologist working in Malaysia. He has a question about the fate of that False Gharial that you mentioned earlier on. After it died, it got preserved in a museum. What happened to that the body of that gharial?
That's a very complicated question. I know that's a way of dodging the answer, but we tried to purchase it to release it while it was still alive. And the head man or whoever it was we were negotiating with said they wanted $700 US. So we just ended up paying for the cow, which died also. As far as I know, it was probably pushed into the Kalinjao River, something like that. Now, we have on occasion, if we found dead animals, preserve them, and you're absolutely right. They're extremely valuable as specimens because there are so few of them, especially larger ones. I think the soft anatomy is essentially still unknown. However, the law of Indonesia says that no private person can keep specimens like that, particularly of what is considered endangered or protected species. So there's the answer. If we would certainly like to send some to Cibinong, where the Indonesian Institute of Sciences is, and let them publish it if they would.
Well, thanks for that. Thanks for the overview, and I hope that answers Shen's question on the fate of that false gharial. Gloria, do you have any final questions and comments? I think we've gone through a really fruitful Q&A, looking at all aspects of Mesangat, from mammals to birds to reptiles, and now to some of the work going forward.
Okay, I'm okay. Thanks really, Rob and Ding Li, for organizing this, and for taking out the time, Robert, to stay up so late.
Well,
Yeah. Okay, so we have come to the end of the presentation. We hope you learned a lot.
Yeah, Gloria, one
Thank
thing,
you for joining us.
just
Yes.
let the rest know that the website address of Yayasan Ulin is in the chat box. So for those
Yes.
of you who want to read up more about the work of Rob, Brian, and the teams, you can find out more details from the website as well. Yeah.
and if I can interject one, you have my email, and anyone is welcome to send me an email with any further questions, and I'll answer them best I can.
Thanks, Rob. Yeah.
Wait, okay, so there's a whole slew of thank yous coming in for Rob
Yeah, and thanks to
in
really
the chat group. Yeah.
Well, a lot of thanks from me too for your
yeah.
support.
And thanks
Yeah.
to all our friends. I think the audience has been pretty diverse. I see major names in conservation in Southeast Asia here, from all regions of Borneo. There's folks from Brunei. I see Brunei names. I think Dr. Hanirul is there. I see Peninsula names. I see other folks from Sabah, Sarawak. So yeah, it's quite a great audience here. Thanks again. Yeah, thanks for making time for us to talk about Mesangat.
My pleasure.
Yeah,
Okay.
and Gloria, do you want to say a few, maybe a few final words about the Nature Society and
Oh, yeah.
some of, yeah, I think that
Okay.
will be a fitting
Okay.
end to today's presentation. Yeah.
Okay, so basically this talk is brought to us by Nature Society. Myself and Ding Li, we are both volunteers there. So NSS, Nature Society Singapore, is an NGO that is dedicated to the appreciation and conservation, study and enjoyment of the natural heritage in both Singapore and Malaysia and the surrounding region. And essentially what we do is to organize nature appreciation activities like guided nature walks, bird and butterfly watching, slide talks, and overseas eco trips. And we conduct conservation projects and surveys. I'm just reading off the website, by the way, which you can actually go and see for yourself, but it's okay. NSS also collaborates with schools and community groups to promote nature appreciation and education. And we also campaign for the protection of natural habitats. So we are happy to organize more talks. So if you have any ideas, you can always contact myself or Ding Li. And it'd be nice to have a community of conservationists coming together to share conservation ideas. Yes.
Yeah, there's a lot of good work in Southeast Asia. I think now that we are all more or less locked up in our own countries, this is actually a good time and an opportunity to come together online and share this stuff. So yeah, I was very pleased to see this webinar happen today. Yeah.
Yes.
I am too. I agree.
Yeah, so I guess I know there are probably a few more questions lurking around the audience. So feel free to send those questions to us. I'll put it in the chat box before it closes. But once again, me and Gloria would like to thank all our friends from the region who have joined us today. We really appreciate your time, but we are also aware that it is nearing to lunchtime Malaysia, Brunei, Indonesia. So we're going to let you off.
And bedtime for Rob.
Well,
bedtime for
no,
Rob,
just
yeah.
just remember that there has to be supper first.
Absolutely, yeah.
Oh,
not to
supper
forget
first,
supper,
yes.
yeah. So I think we could conclude here, but we'll probably linger a bit longer in case anybody wants to ask any final questions. So Gloria, maybe we can hold the
Yeah, of
webinar for a
course.
couple of more minutes, yeah. But in the
Yes.
meantime, thanks once again to everybody. I see many more names now that the screen is moving. So thanks Madhu, and thanks Park Yus for joining us on this this webinar on the Saturday morning, yeah.
Mm.
So I think that's all for this morning. I hope we can have more of these kinds of webinars going forward. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.